Before starting the story, please like and subscribe the channel. Okay, let's dive into the story. One of my first jobs as a trainee was a search op for a 4-year-old kid that had gotten separated from his mom. This was one of those cases where we knew we were going to find him because the dogs were on a strong scent trail and we saw clear signs that he was in the area. We ended up finding him in a berry patch about half a mile from where he'd been last seen. Kid wasn't even aware that he'd wandered that far. One of the vets brought him back, which I was glad for because I'm really not good with kids, and I find it hard to talk to them and keep them company. As my trainer and I are headed back, she decides to take me on a detour to show me one of the hot spots where we tend to find missing people. It's a natural dip in the land near a popular trail, and people will usually move downhill because it's easier. We hike out there, it's a few miles away, and we get there in about an hour or so. As we're walking around the area, and she's pointing out places she's found people in the past, I see something in the distance. Now, this area we're in is about 8 miles from the main parking area, though there's back roads you can take to get closer if you don't want to hike that far. But we're on state-protected land, which means there can't be any kind of commercial or residential development out here. The most you'll ever see is a fire tower or makeshift shelter that homeless people think they can get away with building. But I can see from here that whatever this thing is has straight edges. And if there's one thing you learn quickly, it's that nature rarely makes straight lines. I point it out, but she doesn't say anything. She just hangs back and lets me wander over and check it out. I get within about 20 feet of it, and all the hair on the back of my neck stands up. It's a staircase in the middle of the fucking woods. In the proper context, it would literally be the most benign thing ever. And it's just a normal staircase with beige carpet and about 10 steps tall. But instead of being in a house where it obviously should be, it's out here in the middle of the woods. The sides aren't carpeted, obviously, and I can see the wood it's made of. It's almost like a video game glitch, where the house has failed to load completely and the stairs are the only thing visible. I stand there, and it's like my brain is working overtime to try and make sense of what I'm seeing. My trainer comes and stands next to me, and she just stands there casually, looking at it as if it's the least interesting thing in the world. I ask her what the fuck this thing is doing here, and she just chuckles. Get used to it, rookie. You're gonna see a lot of them. I start to move closer, but she grabs my arm. Hard. I wouldn't do that, she says. Her voice is casual, but her grip is tight, and I just stand there looking at her. You're gonna see them all the time, but don't go near them. Don't touch them. Don't go up them. Just ignore them. I start to ask her about it, but something in the way she's looking at me tells me that it's best if I don't. We end up moving on, and the subject doesn't come up again for the rest of my training. She was right, though. I'd say about every 5th call I go on, I end up running across a set of stairs. Sometimes they're relatively close to the path, maybe within 2 or 3 miles. Sometimes they're 20, 30 miles out, literally in the middle of nowhere, and I only find them during the broadest searches or training weekends. They're usually in good condition, but sometimes it looks like they've been out there for miles. All different kinds, all different sizes. The biggest I ever saw looked like they came out of a turn-of-the-century mansion and were at least 10 feet wide, with steps leading up at least 15 or 20 feet. I've tried talking about it with people, but they just give me the same response my trainer did. It's normal. Don't worry about it, they're not a big deal, but don't go close to them or up them. When trainees ask me about it now, I give them the same response. I don't really know what else to tell them. I'm really hoping someday I get a better answer, but it hasn't happened yet. I've been a search and rescue SAR officer for over a decade now. The vast, untamed wilderness of our national parks holds many secrets, and while I've encountered my share of injured hikers and lost campers, there are some stories that haunt me to this day. One such case happened a few years back. It was a chilly autumn evening when we got the call. A family had reported their teenage daughter missing. They were camping near the Old Forest Trailhead, a spot notorious for its dense trees and tricky terrain. The girl, Lily, had gone for a short walk after dinner and never returned. Our team assembled quickly, gearing up with our flashlights, maps, and radios. As we entered the forest, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows. The air was thick with the scent of pine and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures beginning their night. We split into pairs, fanning out in different directions. I was partnered with Jake, a seasoned SAR officer who had a knack for finding people in the most improbable places. As we trudged deeper into the woods, the trees seemed to close in on us, their branches intertwining like skeletal fingers. "Lily!" we called out repeatedly, our voices echoing through the stillness. An hour passed with no sign of her. The forest was unnervingly quiet, save for the crunch of leaves under our boots and the occasional rustle of unseen animals. We reached a small clearing, and that's when I saw it. A faint, flickering light deeper in the forest. It looked like a lantern, swaying gently. I nudged Jake and pointed. He nodded, and we made our way towards it, hopeful it might be Lily or someone who had seen her. As we approached, the light vanished, plunging us back into darkness. We exchanged uneasy glances but pressed on. We reached the spot where the light had been, only to find a small, abandoned campsite. A rusted old lantern lay on the ground, long extinguished. "Hello," Jake called out, his voice laced with tension. Silence. We examined the campsite, finding nothing but old, decayed supplies that had clearly been there for years. It was unsettling, but we had a missing girl to find. We marked the location on our map and continued our search. Another hour went by, and the forest seemed to grow colder, the chill seeping into our bones. We were about to turn back when we heard it, a soft, faint crying. My heart leapt as we followed the sound, hoping against hope it was Lily. The crying led us to a narrow ravine, its steep sides slick with moss and fallen leaves. At the bottom we saw her, a small figure huddled against the rocks, sobbing. Relief washed over me as I called out, "Lily, we're here to help!" She looked up, her tear-streaked face pale in the moonlight. But as we got closer, something felt off. Her eyes were wide with fear, not relief. She glanced past us, into the darkness behind. "Please, we have to go," she whispered urgently. "He's coming." Before we could ask who she meant, a loud crack echoed through the forest. Jake and I spun around, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. There was no one there, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. We helped Lily up, her legs trembling. "Who's coming?" Jake asked gently. She shook her head, too scared to speak. We began our ascent out of the ravine, every snap of a twig and rustle of leaves setting my nerves on edge. The forest seemed to close in around us, the shadows growing darker and more menacing. As we reached the top, Lily suddenly screamed, pointing behind us. I turned just in time to see a tall, shadowy figure standing at the edge of the ravine. It was indistinct, more a silhouette than a person, but its presence was utterly malevolent. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Lily's hand and pulling her along. Jake was right behind us as we sprinted through the forest, branches whipping at our faces. The figure didn't follow, but the oppressive feeling of being pursued didn't fade. We didn't stop until we reached the forest edge, gasping for breath. The lights of the ranger station were a welcome sight. We hurried inside, slamming the door shut behind us. Only then did we feel a semblance of safety. Lily was reunited with her tearful parents, but she never spoke of what she saw in the forest. We filed our report, noting the strange campsite and the shadowy figure. Officially, it was logged as an encounter with a possibly dangerous person, but Jake and I knew better. There was something else in those woods, something beyond our understanding. A lot of my less outdoorsy friends want to know if I've ever seen the Goat Man while I've been out on calls. Unfortunately, or I guess fortunately, I've never had anything quite like that happen. I guess the closest was the whole black-eyed man thing, but I didn't see anything. However, there was one call where I had something kind of similar happen, but I'm not sure I'm willing to chalk it up to the Goat Man. We'd gotten a report that an older woman had fainted along one of the trails and needed assistance getting back down to the main area. We hike up to where she's at, and her husband is just beside himself. He runs, well, I guess more jogs to us, and tells us that he was a little ways off the trail looking at something when his wife starts screaming behind him. He runs back to her, and she's passed out on the trail. We get her on a backboard, and as we're getting her down to the welcome center, she comes to and starts screaming again. I calm her down and ask her what happened. I can't remember verbatim what she said, but essentially what happened was this. She'd been waiting for her husband when she started hearing this really strange sound. She said it sounded sort of like a cat, but it was off somehow, and she couldn't quite figure out why. She went a little ahead to try and hear it better, and it sounded like it was coming closer. She said the closer it got, the more uneasy she was, until she finally figured out what was wrong. I do remember this next part because it was so weird that I don't think I could forget it if I tried. It wasn't a cat. It was a man saying the word meow over and over. Just meow, meow, meow. But it wasn't a man. It couldn't have been, because I've never heard a man make his voice buzz like that. I thought my hearing aid was going out, but it wasn't. I adjusted it, and it still sounded all buzzy. It was awful. He was coming closer, but I couldn't see him. And the closer he got, the more scared I was. And the last thing I remember was a shape coming out of the trees. I guess that's when I fainted. Now, obviously, I'm a little perplexed as to why a guy would be out in the fucking woods chanting meow, meow at people. So once we get down the mountain, I tell my superior that I'm going to go search the area to see if I can find anything. He gives me the go-ahead, and I grab a radio and hike back to where she fainted. I don't see anyone, so I keep going about a mile more, and when I head back, I go off the trail to see if I can figure out where she saw him coming from. It's almost sunset by this point, and I don't have any desire to be out at night alone, so I just sort of write it off and make a mental note to check it out again tomorrow. But as I'm headed back, I start to hear something in the distance. I stop, and I call out for anyone in the immediate area to identify themselves. The sound didn't come closer or get louder, but it sounded exactly like a man saying, meow, meow, in this really odd monotone. As comical as it makes it sound, it was almost like that guy on South Park with the electrolarynx, Ned. I go off the trail in the direction I think it's coming from, but I never seem to get closer. It's almost like it's coming from all directions. Eventually, it just sort of fades out, and I ended up going back to the Welcome Center. I didn't get any further reports like that, and even though I went back to that area, I never heard that exact sound again. I suppose it could have been some stupid kid out there fucking with people, but even I have to admit it was weird.